Okay, good morning. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Gideon. I'm a sales engineer with Retrospect. And today we're going to be covering some technical aspects of Retrospect Virtual. Just so you guys know, there's a shorter, more condensed version of this webinar on the Retrospect website. It's just under 9 minutes. And on the same tutorial page, you can also find a full-length version of this webinar presented by Kyle Lintz. So I will be posting the link in the chat so you can go over there to look at that and bookmark that for reference at a later time. So basically Retrospect Virtual, there are two parts to this software: the management console, which you see here, as well as the virtual host server portion, which I'll be covering later on. The management console is basically a web interface. It's what you see here. And when you download the program, this is what it's going to install initially. It's a little bit over 1 gigabyte. It'll get you a desktop icon and you can launch it that way, or you can have it bookmarked like I do here in your web browser. It's important to note that you don't want to install this on a web host or any other server that uses this 127.0.0.1 loopback address, or any server that's going to have conflicts on ports 80 or 443. So let's get started with the management console. The default login when you first get in is going to be system, and then you can set it to remember your login name if you want to. And it's going to bring you to this dashboard. I'm not going to be covering everything in detail here today, but I'm going to hit on some key points. The first being this license portion down here. So when you first install it, it's going to populate with a temporary license. It's good for about 60 days. When you end up purchasing the software, they're going to send you a new license name and key. In which if you already have the software installed, you'll come into this portion of the management console and you'll replace both of these with the copy that they sent you for your purchased version. And then you can run a connection test. This authenticates the license with our servers to make sure it's good. And if the connection test is good, you can just go ahead and click update, and it'll take you off of that temp license, which it'll say here, and it'll update it with whichever, an OEM license or an NFR license that you purchased. The other important part of the license section here are these details down here. It'll tell you what you've purchased. If you're running the temp software, everything will be available to you here. But the client add-on modules are purchases in addition to the base license. So you basically just buy what you need. So if you're looking to do Exchange, you'll purchase that add-on, VMware, Hyper-V, Office 365, et cetera, et cetera. And over here, it tells you your quota, the amount that you have purchased. Used is what you've already told the software to use, and then available is what you still have available in your as a part of your quota. So here you can see I have 3 Office 365 add-on modules available to me. I'm currently using one of them. That means I have a backup set up for Office 365 that the virtual host server is using, and I still have 2 available if I wanted to create 2 additional backup sets. Open Direct Granular Restore. This is important. I'm going to be covering both of these in detail today and show you what that looks like, as well as Hyper-V and VMware here being the most common add-on modules. Per guest VM, these are going to be better for smaller environments. Say if you only have 5 virtual machines that you want to back up, I've got a quota here of 5. Or per socket, if you have a very large environment, this will be the cheaper route for you to go instead of purchasing add-on modules on a per virtual machine basis. And that is all I'm going to cover in the license portion right now. Also, I know that in our web browsers, we're all in the habit of clicking the back arrow to go back to the previous screen. You don't want to do that in the management console. You'll either want to hit the green save button if you've made any changes, or just hit the X to cancel and go back to the dashboard. So users, groups, and policies. User groups. If you're familiar with Active Directory, this will be familiar to you. This comes with the all users group by default, and it's tied in with the policy group. And I'll cover that in more detail in a moment. But first, let's walk you through the user creation process. I've already got my user here, but there's not going to be any in here when you first come in. You're just going to go ahead and click this plus button to create a new user. And you'll see this screen. You're going to define the login name, the login password for this user, and then select the user group that you want them to be a part of. It will default to the all users group, so you don't need to check that. But if you've created more users groups, you'll want to select which one you want this user to be a part of. And then you'll just go ahead and click on this arrow down here to proceed to the next screen. Here you see an alias box. The alias is only really relevant if you have a bunch of users. Say if you're using MSP and you're having customers running their own backups, you can add an alias. But if you or maybe one or two other people on your team are responsible for the backups, you don't really need to put anything in here. The most important part is this subscription type of trial user and paid user. It's going to default to trial user, so leave it at trial user if you're running the trial version of the software. But if you purchase the software, you're going to want to change this over to paid user. And you can set your time zone, the language for the user. Go ahead and click next. And and by the way, again, the trial user, that'll expire in about 2 months. So same as the 60 days for the software itself. And here's where we run into the most issues with customers who have created users, where they run into issues. You're going to want to change this from Retrospect Backup user over to virtual host server user. And as you can see, it populated with a lot more options, including Exchange and SQL, VMware, Infile Delta, et cetera, et cetera. And here is where you're going to specify what this user can do in Retrospect Virtual. So if you want them to be able to set up Exchange backups or SQL backups, you're going to want to check these and add them to this user. Here you can see we got VMware. There's a Hyper-V option over here. Some older, Lotus, Oracle database server. This Infile Delta, that's going to be important to remember that that's here. I'll cover that a little later on. But if you want to use the feature, just remember that you'll need to turn that on here as well. The client host limit. In some environments, you'll be running multiple instances of the virtual host server. The client host limit will limit how many machines can log into this account at once. So let's say you've got 3 servers and you're running virtual host server on each one, and you want to limit this user to only be able to log into one of those at a time. You'll go ahead and check this box and leave it at 1. If you want them to log into 2 simultaneously, you'll change that to 2. Otherwise, you can just leave this unchecked and it will remain at unlimited. Run direct. So the run direct feature, it mounts your backed up virtual machine and allows you to run it before the backup finishes. You can turn this on to limit how many of those you can have simultaneously, but we recommend just leaving it off so it won't cause any issues. And then we'll go ahead and click next. And then you'll see this manage contact information page. Similar to the alias setting on the first page, you really don't need to put anything in here, but it can be useful if you're creating a large number of accounts and you've got multiple users and you want to keep track of their contact information. So it's really up to you if you want to put anything in here, but it's not necessary. And then once you're done, this is the last page. You'll go ahead and click the save button. I'm not going to save this user, so I'm just going to click X to cancel and return to the previous screen. And so that's it for user creation. Let's go ahead and take a look at the policy groups here. Similar to the user groups, it comes with the default settings policy group by default. You can create new ones. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on here. As you can see, there are some different tabs in this column with a bunch of different settings. For user settings here, you can come in and manage things like invalid login attempts, password. You can change the expiring date on the password, change the complexity requirements for those passwords. And you can also set email reports for your users. And these are by policy group, not users. So you can create different policy groups with different settings. If you want, say you got 5 users in one department, 5 in another, and you want them to have different settings, you create a policy group for each group of users. For backup settings, here's where you'll specify what the user can back up and backup sets at the policy level. The one important thing to note here is that not all cloud providers are going to be in this list by default. I had to come in here and add Backblaze manually to get that to work. And also the Office 365 backup, for some reason, does not automatically show up here. So if you first install the software, it's not going to be in your default policy group. You'll have to click this plus button to add the option to utilize Office 365 backups. If you don't do that, once you go over to the virtual host server portion of the software, you will not have the Office 365 backup option available to you. There's some other options here you can go through and play with. I'm not going to cover anything else right now, just those key points. And then I'm going to go ahead and click cancel and go back. And X out of here again. And then the last thing I want to look at while we're here are the backup and restore logs. So you'll come in here and you can see there's different options up here, and it gives you, I don't have anything in here right now, but if you have any errors in running your backups, it's going to show up in the list here under backup errors. And there's also going to be a little button to the right over here that you can click on. It'll download the error log as a PDF, and then you can just email that off to our support team, and we'll take a look at it and figure out what's going on. Same thing with restore jobs, backup jobs. As you can see here, I've got a backup set log, and then you've got your activities log as well, which details all of the activities that Retrospect Virtual is going through. And also you can click here to see live activities. If you've got anything running, you can come into this tab and see what's going on there as well. And I can show you that in a minute once we get to the virtual host server portion of the software. So just as a brief recap on the management console here, just remember not to install it on a server that's utilizing the loopback address. If you do, say it's a web host, and you bring up this page, it'll default to the web host splash screen, and you won't be able to see the virtual management console dashboard. And same thing on ports 80 and 443. So the last thing we're going to look at here is this blue button. This is how you download the virtual host server portion of the software, which you can see my icon on the desktop here. This is what's responsible for doing the backups and restores. So you'll definitely want to grab this as well. You'll just click on this blue button. It'll take you to this page, and you see we have different versions here. You can download it for Windows or Linux. Or Ubuntu specifically, if you're using that copy of Linux. There's an online download and an offline download version of this. The online download downloads about a 2 megabyte downloader file and then installs it while pulling it over the internet. I prefer just to grab the whole thing on the front end using the offline download. It's about 250 megabytes. And then you can run it offline at any time of your choosing. Where you install the virtual host server is going to depend on what type of virtualization software you're using. So for Hyper-V, virtual host server has to be installed on the Hyper-V host itself. If you're using a Hyper-V cluster, you'll need to install it on each node of that cluster. I'm not using a cluster, but I am demonstrating Hyper-V today. So I have virtual host server running on the same server where I'm running Hyper-V. For VMware, it doesn't really matter where you install it as long as the virtual host server, as long as the server where it's installed has access over the network to the vCenter or ESXi hosts. If you're backing up databases on your virtual machines like SQL or Exchange, a copy of VHS should be installed on those virtual machines as well. And that is all I'm going to cover today for the management console. This is the lesser portion of the webinar today. If you guys have any questions, feel free to post those either in the chat or the Q&A section. I'll be looking at those as we go along, and I'll answer your questions as they come in. But for now, we're just going to move on to the virtual host server portion and see what that looks like. So I'm going to launch my vCenter manager, bring up Hyper-V, my bad, not vCenter. This isn't VMware. And then I'm going to launch the virtual host server. Go ahead and minimize this for now. So this is the virtual host server portion of the software. This is what it looks like. The first thing, you can tell this to save your password and log you in automatically, but just be aware that if you do that, you won't have this advanced option down here. The advanced option, you can come in here and change this and point it to the location of the server where the application resides. Again, I'm using Hyper-V and the loopback address, so I don't need to change this. But if you do need to change it to communicate, say if you're using VMware or something similar for that reason, or you got an Exchange server or SQL database server, you can come in here and change this as well and point it to that address, as well as using a proxy to access the internet if you want to. But I'm going to go ahead and log in. Usually takes a few seconds to get in. And then here's the virtual host server dashboard. Let's go ahead and start looking at some of what's involved here, starting with utilities. You probably only need to come into utilities in the case of a catastrophic failure. Say if you're locked out of the building or you need to decrypt your backup data. If you only have the backup data for some reason, let's say this system crashes, but I have a NAS device where I've stored my backup data. And I reinstall virtual host server on another machine. You can come in here and point the for decrypt. You would come to decrypt backup data, and you would point this to the location on your NAS device where the backup is, and then you would decrypt it. It would obviously decrypt it, and then that backup would be available to be used now. For data integrity check, this verifies the integrity of your backups. So if something messes up during your backup, you can come in here, select the backup set. It'll mark the backup to be backed up again. And then you got a couple of different options here, which I'm not going to cover right now. Space freeing up, it's poorly worded, but this is basically just grooming. So you'll come in here to set up a grooming policy. No, that's not what you do. You set up your grooming policy in the backup set itself. And then if you want to manually run that grooming policy, you'll come in here, you'll select your backup set, and then you can start running that grooming policy manually. You can set the grooming policy on a schedule so that it kicks off automatically. But if you want to kick it off at any time you want, just come in here to do that. And delete backup data is just what it sounds like. You would select the backup set, and you can delete the backup data for that backup set. Settings, there's not a lot in here. You can define a proxy if you want, similar to the advanced settings on the first screen, or there's this Windows event log. I've never ran into customers that have needed this, but if you want the program to make notes in the Windows event log, you can come in here and do that too. And then you would just click save to save those changes. And that's all that's here in settings. Pretty simple. So now for the meat of the webinar, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our backup set creation. As you can see, I've got two here. Today, I'm going to be running the demo from the Granular RD demo that I already have set up, but I'm going to go ahead and click add here and walk you guys through the backup set creation process. So you're going to see it has a name. You can name the backup set whatever you want. And then for the backup set type, you'll just drill down and select whatever it is you're looking to back up. So for Hyper-V, it looks locally on the server it's running on for the version of Hyper-V you're using. So it automatically populated here with Microsoft Hyper-V Server 2019. Whoops. And also there's the failover cluster option as well. For VMware, it's a little bit more involved because it's across the network. You're going to need to put in your login credentials for the vCenter or ESXi host. The backups will run either to that server or you can specify an alternate location. And I'll cover that in detail when we go into the backups themselves and as well as the restores. And then so yeah, you're going to need to put in the username, password, as well as the information, the host information, the port information of that VMware machine, and as well as selecting the version of VMware that you're using. Hyper-V is less involved, so I'm just going to leave it on that one for now. You can also use Office 365 backups, and you'll need to put in a username and account password, as well as an app password to get a virtual host server to authenticate and connect with the Office 365 backups. So here now it's pulled the information from the Hyper-V manager. I've got two virtual machines running. When choosing a VM, you need to select the VM itself and not one of the disks in the list. If you just select the disks, you're going to run into issues. There are reasons to use that, but I'm not going to cover it today. But it's better just to select the virtual machines here at the parent level. And then you'll go ahead and click next. You can choose to specify a schedule for this backup set. I'm going to leave it off for now, but you can come in here and you can tell Retrospect Virtual the intervals at which you want to run the backups for this backup set, as well as if you want to run a retention policy. And then backup mode. So before I cover that, let's look at these storage destinations. You can specify a network attached storage, a local drive, or a cloud directory. And so let's go ahead and do that. I'm adding one now. For single storage destination, I have my local drive here, which then I would come in and select a path. I'll use my Retrospect Virtual and Backups folder for that. And then you'll click Test. Obviously, this is going to succeed since it's running on the same machine. And for Run Direct, again, this mounts, Run Direct mounts the virtual machine like an ISO. So if you want to utilize the Run Direct feature in this backup set, you want to make sure that this is checked on for the storage destination, each storage destination that you want to run that from. I'll go ahead and leave that on. And then you can add multiple storage destinations. So if you wanted to add a cloud storage location, you would switch this from single storage destination to destination pool. and then add new destination pool. And then you're going to have new options here. As you can see, I've got a bunch of S3 compatible cloud storage locations, as well as OneDrive and Dropbox, and so on and so forth. For S3, it's going to ask you for your bucket credentials. You'll punch all of that in here. And then once you do that, you can go ahead and click test and see if Retrospect Virtual is communicating successfully with that location. And it would work the same way for any NAS devices that you have connected as well. So for backup mode, you've got sequential and concurrent. Sequential will back up to each storage destination in this list individually before moving on to the next one, while concurrent will back up to all three of them, all of them simultaneously. If you have three, it'll back up to three. Four, it'll back up to all four. So if you've got a more advanced server with better specifications, you can change this to concurrent. Otherwise, you can just leave it on sequential and it'll hit each location one by one. So also for just so you know, the run direct, this option can't be used with offsite locations. It can only be used on the local network or the machine itself because it mounts it from the backup. So if you've got a remote location that's not on the network, you won't be able to use run direct. Also, if you want to use encryption, run direct needs to be turned off. But besides those two things, you can just leave it on and there's really no point to turning it off. So offsite locations, not on the network, or if you need encryption, just remember to turn that off. And you can specify that for each individual existing storage destination. So let's say you got a remote NAS device. You can turn off the run direct for that individual storage location while leaving it on for your local drive. Granular Restore. So Granular Restore is an add-on. If you remember in the management console, it doesn't come with your license by default. It's similar to Run Direct in that it allows you to mount the backup as an ISO. And I'll be running through the Granular Restore process as well today to show you what that looks like. If you have this turned on and you run a Granular Restore, you can then dig through the backup in Windows Explorer and choose what you want to restore. It's important to note that the Granular Restore add-ons, they're per backup set and not per virtual machine. So for this backup set I'm creating, I have two virtual machines. Granular Restore will be able to be used by each one of those. If you've got 20 virtual machines in your backup set, you can use Granular Restore for each virtual machine in that backup set. If I used Granular Restore here, if I turned it on and saved it, and I wanted to create a second backup set, and I only have one Granular Restore add-on module license, I won't be able to use Granular Restore on my second backup set because I'm already using it on my first backup set. So I'll either need to leave that off on the second backup set, or I'll need to delete my first backup set to reclaim that add-on module so then I can use it in my new backup set. Or you can purchase multiple licenses for the add-on module for Granular Restore and use them in multiple backup sets as well. Just remember that this needs to be turned on at the time you create the backup set. Otherwise, you'll need to make a new one. You won't be able to turn this on later on after you save the backup set. So it needs to be turned on now if you want to use it. I've got another backup set that's already using my Granular Restore license, so I'm going to leave this off. And then it's going to ask you to specify a temp directory. The backup will put the files into the temporary directory before moving them over to where they need to be for the virtual machine. It's recommended that the temporary directory should have an amount of available space equivalent that's about half the size of the virtual machine or virtual machines. So if you've got a 300 gigabyte virtual machine, you'll want to have at least 150 gigabytes of space in the temp location. And then you can tell it whether or not you want to remove the temporary files here after the backup completes. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at the default. You can change this to whatever you want. And then it's going to tell me, congratulations, you've created your backup set. At this point, you can click backup now and run a backup manually, or you can just close out if you set a schedule for the backup set and just let it kick off and run the first backup at the time that you specified for that schedule. And it takes us back to the main backup set screen, and you can see we've got our new backup set down here. I'm not going to use this one today, but that is how you create a backup set. So let's go ahead and look at making changes to the backup set after we've already created one. So to make changes, you would just click on the backup set. It'll take you to this screen, but just remember that you will not be able to change the run direct setting or the granular restore settings here. If you want to change those, you're going to have to make an entirely new backup set. You're probably going to only be coming in here to check your source, your schedule, or your destination. So for sources, you can add or remove virtual machines in the list to be backed up in the backup set. Say if I want to take my Red Hat Linux off of the backups, I would come in here and uncheck it. You can change your schedule here, modify that according to your liking, or you can add and remove storage destinations. So let's say you have a backup set, but your company purchased a new NAS device and you've got it up on your network now. You can come in here to your backup set, click add, and then you would walk through the process and you would define the path to that network storage, and you could add that as an additional destination for your backups as well. So the in-file delta, if you remember, I mentioned this when we were in the management console under the license section in the user creation, to remember that you need to check that for the user for the in-file delta. It defaults to incremental. What incremental does is it grabs any changes since the last backup. If you change it to differential, this will grab any changes since the last full backup. So you can come in here to turn in-file delta for incremental or differential backups on or off. And there's also the retention policy. It defaults to 7 days, but you can change it to according to your needs. I like to set it a little higher, say at 21 days, and it keeps the deleted files for that long. There's some advanced retention policies that I won't cover today, but if you wanted to modify your retention policy, this is where you would come in to do it. Then I'll go ahead and click save my changes. And if you wanted to run a backup manually at a later time, you would just click this blue backup button here and then select the backup set that you want to run your manual backup on. And that's all we're going to talk about today for backup sets and the backup portion itself. I'll give you guys a minute if you've got any questions, and then we'll go ahead and look at run direct and granular restores. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in yet, so I'm going to move right along here. So to run a restore, you would obviously click the restore button here, and it'll bring you back to your backup sets. And you would select whatever backup set for the backup that you want to run the restore for. I'm going to use my Granular RD demo backup set. And then it'll ask you to choose the destination that you want to restore from. If you have multiple destinations for your backup set, you can choose which one you want to restore from. I only have a backup on my local drive, so that's the one I'm going to use. And then it asks you how you want to do your restore. For the first one, I'm going to be demoing the Granular Restore. So you'll need to change this from Restore Virtual Machines to the Granular Restore option. And then you can tell it to either mount your virtual disks automatically or not. I'm going to have them mount automatically. But if you leave that unchecked, at the end of the restore process, at the end of the restore setup screen, anyway, you can tell it how you want to mount those disks. And then there's a read timeout limit here. I'm not going to go over that right now. And then you'll go ahead and click next. And then it's going to pop up with the virtual machines available in your backup. And you're going to select the one that you want to restore. So we're going to do the Windows 10 demo. Up here, you can see dates and times. If you've got multiple backups running on a regular schedule, you can come in here and select which backup you want to run from. I don't have very many, but if you might have a number of backups in this list. You can, if you're looking for a specific file or a specific instance of the virtual machine on a certain date, from a certain date, say it got corrupted after that date, and you didn't find out until many backups later, you would come in here and you could drill back into that old backup and restore that virtual machine. I'm going to select my Windows 10 demo and click next. You're going to see another temp directory screen. This does not restore the virtual machine. If you click the restore button, it just sets it up so that the VM is ready to be restored as a granular restore. For the temporary directory here in the restore, we recommend a directory location at a 1-to-1 ratio. So it should have at least the same amount of space as the size of the VM or VMs that you're restoring. I'm just going to leave it on my default and click restore. Now it's getting this ready. It's going to ask you to choose a drive letter. You can use whatever you want. I'm going to leave it on E. Before I do that, though, I'm going to go ahead and open Windows Explorer so we can see what this looks like. And click OK. And it's going to start mounting this. And you'll see E pop up here. Open Direct. Now we've got our Open Direct. Should take about 30 seconds to complete. And now it's going to start mounting the disks for that VM. All right, so when the volumes show up, you'll see that there's two buttons here next to each disk. You can click on the magnifying glass. This is one way to do it. No, I'm not going to use the boot directory. Let's go ahead and click on volume 2. And you can see the Windows directory structure here. You can drill down into the directories you want here, find the individual folders and files that you want to restore. You can do it this way. What I prefer to do is choose this other option, which is map the device. And then you can specify a drive letter, and I'm going to select G. And then we'll come back over here, and now we can see, it opened it automatically. But now we can see that local disk G got mounted from the VM as if it's a local drive on my computer. So now I can just go into that like it's a drive and drill down into the virtual machine folders and find the file I want. Let's say it's this DLL folder. I don't know what this is. It's for Windows Mail, apparently. But if I want a copy of this from this particular backup, I can just now drag and drop it. Now I've got a copy of the file that I want. If you use the magnifying glass method, it is going to copy the entire directory structure to that file instead of copying only the file. So just be aware that there is that difference. And again, this drive, the local disk G drive, this is not the active virtual machine. It's just a backup and a granular restore of the local disk. And make sure to remember that if you want to use this feature, it has to be selected for the backup set at the time you create it. So I'm done pulling the file I wanted to from my Granular Restore. Now I can just click here to unmap the device. And as you can see, the G drive is now gone. So that disk is now unmapped, even though the virtual disk is still running, and you can still come in and do it this way. And that's it for Granular Restore. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's a really nice feature if you only want to pull files instead of restoring the entire virtual machine itself. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the Granular Restore. And then click cancel to move out of this page. Don't need this open anymore. Oh, and by the way, this open direct E here, that will disappear when you exit the virtual host server. And now let's go ahead and look at the run direct restores. This is if you want to fire up an entire copy of the virtual machine rather than just doing the files and folders from the disks as with the Granular Restore. So I'm going to come back into my Granular RD demo, select my disk. Also remember that Run Direct mounts the virtual machine from the backup so that it's accessible, so that the VM is accessible while it's restoring itself in the background. For this restore, we're going to leave it on the first option on Restore Virtual Machines. It's going to run through the restore process like a regular restore, as opposed to what was happening with the Granular Restore. Go ahead and click Next. You're going to select the virtual machine you want to restore. Same thing with the date and times up here. And also don't select any of this down here. Just make sure you pull the virtual machine at the parent level. Go ahead and click Next. And then it's going to ask you where you want the restore to live. If you leave it on original location, it's going to overwrite your current virtual machine. So that's good if you want to replace this entirely with a restored copy, an older copy of the VM. Otherwise, you can select alternate location. And on the next screen, it's going to ask us where we want to place that, in which case it's just going to restore a copy of the virtual machine while leaving this one intact. You're going to want to go ahead and use Run Direct so that it auto migrates after the run, or you can tell it to auto migrate after Run Direct is running. This auto migrate restores it in the background. You can turn this off so that if you turn this off, you won't be able to run the restored VM until the complete process is finished. If you leave this on, you can fire it up straight away, and this will continue to run in the background. For advanced options, you don't see it here, but if you're using a VMware backup set, there's going to be an auto power on feature here. It's not present in Hyper-V restores, but the VMware auto power on feature, this powers on the virtual machine in VMware before the migration. So I think my settings are good. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And then it's going to ask you for an alternate location. I'm going to change the name just so we can differentiate between the VMs here. Call this restored copy. And then it's going to ask you where you want it to live. Right now it's set to the default. I'm going to go ahead and change this just to make sure it doesn't overwrite anything. Go into my data, Retrospect Virtual. I believe it's in my, let's see, where did I put that? Retrospect Virtual, test restores. Okay, and I've got a disk and a VM folder here. The directory location is going to be this VM folder, and then the hard disk location. So I want to specify that as well to my disk folder. So now I've got the restoring a brand new copy to a totally different location. Go ahead and click next. Again, temporary directory page. We want this to be a 1-to-1 ratio. It can be wherever you want. And then you're going to click restore. Oh, and by the way, for the alternate location, here on this screen, looks like I need to run through this again. It didn't save my settings. I had one additional point I wanted to make. Oops. Restores disk. Okay. So on that, on Hyper-V, you select the local location, just avoid restoring it to the same location where the VM is already. On VMware, however, you need to specify how it's going to be restored on the VM host. So that screen will look a little different. But once you get through that, you're ready to now use the run direct restore. So we're going to go ahead and click restore, and it's going to kick off the process. My VM's small, so it completes pretty quickly. So now let's come over here, and we'll see that my restored copy has shown up in Hyper-V. And now I've got an older restored copy of my Windows 10 demo. It kicked off automatically to running. In VMware, you need to use the auto power on feature, and it'll be the same on VMware. But now we've got our copy running. It's going to continue restoring in the background since we selected that option. But now I can just come over here, double click on this, and boot up the virtual machine while it continues to restore in the background. And for this VM, this process usually takes a little time to get it up and running. Once you get into Windows or whatever operating system you're running, just be aware that, so if a user comes in here and it's continuing to restore in the background like it is here, any changes that users make during that time will transfer over once the auto migration process is done. And also that there might be an interruption for a few seconds while the migration finishes. So if you're in the virtual machine and you're working while this is running, it could lock up for a few seconds while you're working. And that's because of the auto migration. I think I want to let this finish booting into Windows just so you can see that we can get it up running while it continues to restore. But this particular virtual machine takes a while. I might need to get a new backup for this. We'll see. You can stop this at any time too by just clicking the stop button or Xing out of here. There we go. Finally moving into Windows. Normally this shows the whole screen. There we go. Just had to minimize and reopen it. So the reason I'm letting it boot in is just so that you can see that we can actually get into Windows and start doing stuff while the restore continues to run in the background. Does seem to be going slower than usual. Okay. There we go. Sometimes I use this granular test folder to show the granular restore, but we didn't do that this time. But now we're in Windows. This is the restored copy of the virtual machine. It's still booting up. Still restoring. But once it completes, we should be able to start moving around in Windows here. I'm gonna need to get a new backup rolling. This one seems to be degraded, but maybe something else is going on. I'm not sure. But normally we start there we go. You can start working in the start menu, open the Windows folder, start looking around for files that you might need, or let's say you've got some program running on this VM that you want to use. You can fire it up and start working away. But I'm going to go ahead and close it out of this and finish this. And go ahead and click cancel. Yes, I want to stop the restore. Turn that off. Interrupted by user. Where backup sets. Nope, don't want to do that. Normally it pops up with a manage run direct virtual machines option, which it didn't do this time. Yes. Well, okay, so normally once you stop that restore or it finishes, a little option will pop up down here saying manage run direct virtual machines, in which you would click on that, and then you can cancel this, in which case it'll remove it from Retrospect Virtual. But anyway, that's an overview of the management console, as well as the virtual host server, creating backup sets, running your backups, as well as granular and run direct restores. If you guys got questions, feel free to post those now. Otherwise, I'm going to post some links in the chat. If you have any questions that you think of later on, after you start using the trial software, you can either reach out to your sales rep, or you can email sales@retrospect.com or support@retrospect.com, and we'll get back to you